here's something different. Instead of me talking about a VHS of Thomas a Tank I Ffrindiau, it's time that I look into the tape of a show that was originally in English, Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. It's this one, and I'm gonna tell you how I came across this tape. As you already know, during my infancy, my main obsession was Thomas. I would watch some of the VHSs or DVDs, play with some of the toys, my dad telling the stories of the books and or magazines to me and other things. While it's the Welsh dub that I enjoy the most and I'm more familiar with, I never noticed or didn't mind about some pieces of merch that was in English, as I didn't understand that language back then. However, there was one VHS that made me fully experience the original English version of Thomas and Friends, not counting the books as I couldn't read back then. And that's this one, Rock and Roll and Other Stories. I first saw it at one of my mum's friend's house, whom her son was also into Thomas. The tape was lying on the ground in front of a TV, and I really wanted to see it, despite it being in English and that I couldn't understand it. But I didn't mind it, and my mum's friend lent it to me, seeing that I also like Thomas. So this tape, it includes 8 episodes from Series 4, narrated by the late Michael Angelis. And it contained the first appearances of the narrow-gauge engines, with the likes of Skarloey, Rheneas, Peter Sam, Rusty, and Duncan. It also introduced me to 2 other characters that I've never seen on television before, like Duke and Sir Handel. I was already familiar with the narrow-gauge engines, as I remember seeing them on this Welsh DVD where it contained the episode Duncan Duncan, or Gwersi Duncan as it was called in Welsh. I even saw them on the 2001 annual in the story The Good Old Days, as my kid self didn't know it would be the same characters I saw on VHS and DVD. But besides that, the only episodes of the Welsh version my kid self saw of the narrow-gauge engines were Duncan Duncan, Faulty Whistles, Rusty Saves the Day, Snow, and Rusty and the Boulder as seen on home media releases. And on TV, the grand opening, the Refreshment Ladies' Tea Shop, and Trusty Rusty when they aired on the Planet Plant Bach block. Unfortunately for the last one, I didn't see the rest of the episode as I was scared to see Duncan on the verge of falling off the bridge and into the river. It was too much for little me to handle that I turned off the TV and ran crying to my sister's room, as I was too afraid to see Duncan fall into the water. But that was years later when I discovered that Rusty came to his rescue just before the bridge collapses. And prior to that, I saw glimpses of that episode, like a book containing several stories of hits franchises and a clip of it in the VHS and DVD promo. Anyway, I'm getting a bit off topic here. As I was saying, it's this tape that I'm going to be looking into, featuring adventures of the little engines from the Skarloey Railway. Let's see what fun and exciting stories hold over there. And before the logo starts, we have ourselves a promo by VCI, which is an acronym for Video Collection International, as it's promoting VHS tapes of shows they were distributing at the time. First up is Thomas, which is the focus of this video, then is Four Ways Farm, where, fun fact, there exists a Welsh dub of a show. What? None of you have known about it? I saw it back in primary school, and nobody, I mean nobody, has ever recalled watching it. Whatever, at least I'm the only one who ever has a memory of seeing the Welsh dub of Four Ways Farm. Then there's Wind of the Willows, which I never knew was an adaptation of a novel back in the late 1900s. The only adaptation of it that I recall watching was the 1996 film, in French. 'Cause I didn't know there were connections to these two. There's also Sooty and Co., who I do have some experience with Sooty. I vividly remember watching 2 stage shows at an art centre, both of them being Sooty's Magic Castle and Sooty's Magic Wand Factory. There's also this DVD that I asked my mum to buy, as I was familiar with that bear. That DVD contained a stage show all the way back in 1982, and I liked it. And that wouldn't be years later when I looked on the internet to see how big Sooty is, having several shows over the years. There's Teddy Bear Sing-Along, never watched it in my life. Rosie and Jim, I hardly remember it, mostly the theme song and nothing else. But there's also Ragdoll's other show, Tots TV, that I'm more familiar with, as I can recall watching it on CBeebies. And I'd also like to say that the late John Cunliffe passed away years ago, so may he rest in peace. And then there's Brum, whom I have a lot of experience with that car. I watched 2 of the VHS tapes and even remember seeing him on CBeebies. And even though this is showing clips from the 90s series, it's the 2001 revival that I'm more familiar with. I mean, who couldn't forget about that theme song? Brum brum, get things done, souped up cruising superhero. And it's sad to see what the state of a supercar from Birmingham is in now. He's been poorly treated. Anyway, after the promo, we've got 2 warning screens by VCI until we go into the company's logo. Yeah, call it creepy and ominous if you like, but it's still nostalgic to me, as it's got that childhood atmosphere the way I see it. And I also saw that logo in 2 of the Brum tapes and even on this Father Ted DVD. Yup. Oh, but did I mention that this VHS was a re-release of a tape that was originally distributed by the Video Collection back in 1994 and that this one is from 1995? Yeah, go figure. Anyway, on to the episodes, starting with the first, Grand Puff. This episode takes place in winter, as the sound of the wind keeps the engines at the shed awake. That was until Toby suggests that they tell a story and Thomas brings up one that his driver told to him. He tells the others the story about 3 little engines who lived in a little railway, known as the Mid-Sodor Railway. The 3 engines are Stuart, aka Peter Sam, Falcon, aka Sir Handel, and Duke, the oldest of the 3. Duke was wiser than the other 2, as he has more experience with shunting and pulling rolling stock. Stuart and Falcon, however, are young, reckless, and often tease Duke. They also nickname him Grandpuff, due to him being old. It wouldn't be until one day when Duke warned the 2 that if they keep on misbehaving, they would end up like Smudger. Smudger, as you know, was full of himself, cocky, and a show-offy type. He ran roughly and kept on derailing, not minding about a few spills. Duke tried to warn him, but the green engine wouldn't listen, only laughing at him. The manager of the railway then punished Smudger by taking his wheels away and turning him into a generator, never being able to move again. Stuart and Falcon are left speechless with the story and promised themselves never to behave irrationally again. Work continued as normal on the railway as Stuart and Falcon gradually became nicer and the 3 respected each other. But that wouldn't be until much, much later when the hills and mines closed down, meaning that their time in the railway is over. The engines have been put up for sale, as Stuart and Falcon were bought, but not Duke, as he was deemed old. In spite of it, Stuart promised the old engine that he and Falcon would find another railway for him to run on. After oiling and greasing him one last time, Duke's crew said their farewells to him and locked him up in the shed, leaving to find new jobs. Inside the shed, Duke takes a snooze, hoping one day he would run again. But as time went by, a rainstorm washed soil down from the mountains and plants grew around the shed, hiding it. Nobody would know that there is a shed or an engine asleep inside of it. Thomas finishes the story, leaving Percy disappointed. But the blue tank engine reassures him that there is another one, but that'll have to wait until next time. This episode changed everything. It was darker than any of the episodes we've seen, as they had a light-hearted tone. This one, on the other hand, is much darker, as we see the fate of a selfish engine being turned into a generator, unable to move. And the climax of a story where Duke in his own shed becomes buried in the soil and the plants grow all around it, unaware that he's trapped and that he would have called for help if he found out. I mean, yeah, Thomas has never been afraid to go dark at times, as the series has delved into dark topics like Series 2 dealing with dieselization and the concept of scrapped, and Series 5. Well, you get the gist.
Control and plunged over the side into the swamps below.
This episode introduces us to the narrow gauge engines who run on a smaller track gauge as opposed to the standard gauge engines we know from the first 3 seasons. The main star of this episode, Duke, is quite an interesting character. He's old, wise, experienced, and is the head teacher type of engine when he scolds the younger engines for being naughty. And can we tell just how depressing the ending is? For a series that is lively as Thomas, this episode somehow ends on a sad note as we see an engine in his shed buried by nature, with no one knowing he's in there. But that all changes when we get to the next episode. The next is Sleeping Beauty. At night time, the engines at Tidmouth Sheds ask Thomas to continue the story about Duke. As so, Thomas recaps what happened in the last episode and continues where he left off when Duke was buried in the shed. At some point, a group of adventurers organized a meeting with a fat controller with a plan to find and rescue Duke. The search began and everyone looked high and low. Days passed by and the search grew harder, but the rescuers wouldn't give up. It was then at that moment when one of them fell through into a hole and by coincidence he found Duke, the lost engine. By accident. The rescuers tell the old engine that they are here to rescue him and reunite with Stuart and Falcon, much to Duke's delightment. Duke was dug out of the shed and taken to his new home, the Skarloey Railway. Now back with Stuart and Falcon, now named Peter, Sam and Sir Handel, the 2 engines are overjoyed and interrupt his sleep. Duke is annoyed at this and the 2 laughed, telling him they were due back to work and they would keep him in order. Duke has never forgotten Stuart and Falcon's cheeky side, as he is happy to be reunited with his 2 old friends. Thomas finishes the story, this time with a happy ending. The engines agree that the story was great and that it concluded on a happy note, right before they fall asleep, ending the episode. Wow, so straight after the previous episode where it had a mature feel to it, the episode after that went for a comedic and lighter tone. It had a scene where one of the rescuers fell through the roof of Duke's shed and landing on top of him, finding the lost engine by accident. And who could forget the part where Peter, Sam and Sir Handel reunite with Duke? Heartwarming, isn't it? It's much like how a grandparent reunites with his grandchildren for a very long time as the way people see it. And I should agree. The Duke 2-parter is a favourite among fans with the episodes that have story arcs, and I can see why. Overall, a great conclusion to a 2-parter featuring an old engine who's lost to time but eventually found. After that is Bulldog. This episode starts off with Percy acting very impatient as he has a new coat of paint and wants to show it off but complains that his driver is running late. He is told by the big engines that he is actually awake early. Thomas tells Percy it will be time for work, but also warns him not to be impatient, which will lead him to danger unless if Duke is not there. So, Thomas tells yet another story his driver told him about Duke. Long ago, before the Mid-Sodor Railway closed down, Peter, Sam and Sir Handel, who were originally called Stuart and Falcon, worked alongside Duke on the railway. One day, Falcon was told by the manager that he was pleased with his work and is given the task to go on the mountain road, a part of the line that is difficult, so he'll have Duke work with him. Much to Falcon's annoyance, as he thought of him nothing more than a fusspot. The next day, the two are about to go take the road when Duke was supposed to lead the train as he's more experienced, but Falcon insisted that he should be in front as he needed to learn the line. By using the method of double heading, the two take the train through the mountain road. And as Duke tries to warn Falcon about the road, the latter ignored, not minding about the dangers of the line. But after reaching and passing a tunnel, Falcon derails off the rails and dangles on a cliff, with Duke hanging on to him. The crew and the passengers do what they can to save Falcon. But another problem arises as Duke is short on water. It's thanks to a cottage that has a water tank nearby, and the passengers fill Duke's tank one by one. The old engine's tank is full, and so he gets Falcon back onto the rails. The two engines carry on their journey until they arrive at the top station, which is named Skarloey, mind you. The passengers tell the manager that Duke was a hero who stood firm like a bulldog, hence the title of the episode. Falcon thanks him for saving his life, especially when he was rude towards him. Duke gives his thanks to heart and tells him that it would have been a shame if his new coat of paint had been spoilt. That episode is certainly something. Yeah, I keep on saying that in these videos because I rarely have an opinion most of the times. It carried on the trend of Thomas telling the engines the story of Duke like he did in the first two episodes, this time telling the story of how not to be impatient like Falcon. This episode even told us that Peter, Sam and Sir Handel first came to Sodor, albeit them already being there and new to the railway. It even showcased what Falcon's personality is, rude, arrogant, impulsive and bad-tempered. And it was him getting off the rails and dangling on a cliff that got him into trouble. And sure enough, the next episode we're gonna go into is about Sir Handel, so what kind of trouble will he be stirring into? Let's find out. Oh, next episode about Sir Handel? You're thinking that I'm skipping an episode of a Duke Quadrology from the first 4 episodes of Series 4, huh? Well, I'm sorry, but that's how the episodes are laid out on this tape. I didn't notice that there was an extra episode with Duke from that season until years later when I discovered it on the internet. And I would have experienced it in either of these tapes when I was little. But never mind about that, we must focus on the 4th episode in this tape. The 4th episode on the VHS is A Bad Day for Sir Handel. Two old narrow-gauge engines named Skarloey and Rheneas enjoy working on their railway that crosses around lakes and mountainsides. With their old age showing, the two become tired and their drivers see this. They tell them that the manager of the railway has sent 2 engines to help with the work on the Skarloey railway. The 2 new engines arrive on the railway, namely Sir Handel and Peter Sam, who were bought from the Mid-Sodor Railway. Sir Handel is very rude as he complains about the shed's appearance and even insults Skarloey, calling him rubbish. Peter Sam is much friendlier than him and explains to Skarloey that Sir Handel is nice but is in an upset state. Sir Handel is then ordered by his fireman to pick up passengers at the top station, but he refuses, stating that he is tired and asks if Peter Sam can do it instead. He initially does, as his fireman told him to. When Sir Handel comes to pick up the coaches, he insults them, calling them cattle trucks. He then sets off to Crovan's Gate, where he meets Gordon, where the big blue engine's passengers board Sir Handel's train. The two introduce each other, and Sir Handel recognizes Gordon as just a fellow express engine, and even goes on to say that he is used to smart coaches and praises Gordon's own, but soon leaves as Gordon is left speechless. Just as Sir Handel reaches Skarloey station, he was hoping for a rest, but his driver tells him that there's more work to do as he must collect trucks at the quarry. This made him so cross that he refuses and purposefully derails himself to avoid doing that work. Peter Sam arrives with a works train to put Sir Handel back on the rails, and the Fat Controller is there too, on board the train. He tells him that he will talk to him later. When evening came, the Fat Controller came over to the sheds and scolds Sir Handel for being naughty and shuts him up in the sheds until he can be trusted to behave. And what a silly engine he was indeed. Much like last episode, this one showed how much of a selfish git Sir Handel was, by refusing to do any work and insulting other engines. He also gets his comeuppance in this episode when he is told off by the Fat Controller in the end, unless if he would ever redeem himself. And this episode skipped of what I didn't know in this season. Apparently, this episode is the only one in this tape to have Rheneas be acknowledged. Barring the rest of the episodes on this VHS, where he made cameo and background appearances, this one was the closest we saw of him. And he never spoke in it at all, unless if him with a group of engines mocking Peter Sam's wobbly funnel in Special Funnel may count. Out of the 7 narrow-gauge engines seen in this tape, he is the only one not to have a speaking role in any capacity. But oh well, at least this episode showed me Sir Handel and his arrogant personality and such.